abandoned their deen of Allah. So what can we do? What is the role of the Muslims in Britain today? And just how are we going to turn things around for everyone? How does such a small number of people change the destiny of so many? To give you some idea of how that's more than possible, I want to tell you something fascinating about China. We're all aware that China today, in terms of its economic strength, is intimidating. Its trade record is fascinating. But what we see of China today, and more importantly, of China over the last 1100 years, is in so many respects due to the influence of a small group of Muslims. During the 9th century, what had become of China, a united China, suffered heavy military defeat to the Abbasids along its western territories. The Abbasids, however, had no intention of moving further eastward to conquer these territories, and what took place instead was that this area of China fell under the anarchic influence of local tribal leaders. This series of events sent a kind of shockwave through what was left of centrally controlled China, and the country started to suffer badly. Incredibly, the Abbasid ruler at that time decided to send some 4,000 Muslim professionals to aid China in her time of difficulty. And included in this number were civil servants, engineers, military personnel, medical and scientific staff, all of whom were to aid China to recover from her ongoing difficulties. Now, these Muslims became known in China as the Hui, a name that they were to carry from then until now. They form the majority of Chinese Muslims today, and what was once 4,000 people is now estimated to have grown to some 45 to 60 million. And due to the lack of precise data under communist rule, it's hard to be very exact, but it's between 45 and 60 million. Now, in subsequent centuries, many of the Muslims in China, including the descendants of these 4,000, continued to play a major role in China's administration. And by the time of the Yuan dynasty, in the 13th century, when China was under Mongol rule, even under Marco Polo, noted how numerous the Muslim administrators of China had become. Chinese emperors have demonstrated their appreciation of this positive role of the Muslims towards China by making gifts, like the building of mosques. Many experts believe that if it hadn't been for the intervention of the Muslims during the 9th century, the continuity and makeup of China would have become very uncertain, thus affecting world history as we know it today. We should remember that they never actually came into power themselves, but their continued influence was one of the major pillars of China's stability. I just wanted to use that as an example to demonstrate just how important the Muslims of Britain are, and just how we can really do something if we're firm in our commitment to Allah. The miserable situation in which we find the people of Britain today is due to their disempowerment through the dangerous mechanisms of the power elite, camouflaged by the failing political democracy. We must make the efforts to provide a new realm of self-empowerment for the people, helping them to get out from the suffocation of the monopolistic commercial structure. We need to provide the means by which the poorest and weakest of society can be elevated, and we must work to eradicate debt slavery. The Muslims have this responsibility, to ourselves, to our society. It is our contract with Allah, and we have much work to do. The answers are all to be found in that first community, as I mentioned before, the Muslims of Medina. They had success, and they light the way forward for us today. Allah will give us success when we raise up from amongst ourselves strong and capable leaders who establish zakat taken in an Islamic gold dinar. When we abandon usury as a means of generating wealth and promote the use of currency of intrinsic value. We will have success when we provide people with the open markets and encourage free trade, preventing the formation of monopolies in production, distribution, and sale. And we'll have success when we provide learning and opportunities for the young to form active and contributing members of a healthy society through the re-establishment of the guilds and active learning. If by the blessing of Allah we achieve all this, then we will be well on our way to fulfilling our contract and our responsibility as Muslims. And yes, they're ambitious aims, but they're within our reach. They really aren't as difficult as you might think they are. If we start to look at the resources we already have as a community, then we begin to see just how easy things might actually be in terms of putting into practice some of these things I've just mentioned. Firstly, we can see that Britain is covered from north to south in Muslim communities, a few of them small and remote, like the ones in the Scottish Shetland Islands. But the majority of them are in fact large and well connected to the others, like those we find in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Birmingham and London, just to mention a few. Often, due to family connections alone, there are ties between these communities, but there are also other connections based on trade and commerce between these communities already in existence, connections that could so easily be strengthened and expanded. In terms of number, wealth and expertise, the Muslim community of Britain is already in place to put into practice projects that will bring benefit to the deen, to the establishment of Islam and the welfare of this country's people. It calls for unity and clarifying our common goals, understanding the direction we're moving in together as a whole. And the kind of project that we can start to implement immediately is the establishment of a network of open markets across the country. And what do I mean by open markets? Let me start by describing what I don't mean. You could say that my father is one of the last al-muhtasib. Is that correctly said?
Muhtasib.
Muhtasib is the Arabic word. Of some of the few remaining open markets in England, not so open. In other words, he's the local council market officer. He's responsible for running the street markets in North Norfolk. He arrives early in the morning, before any traders turn up, and he assigns them an area in the town square or car park where they can put up their stall. He makes sure that only those licensed to sell actually put up their stalls. He mediates and decides disputes between the traders. He collects a fee from all of them. And at the end of a long day, he makes sure that traffic is disturbed as least as possible while the traders pack up and leave. Now, these traders are given licenses based upon what they sell. And this balance is preserved by the licensing policy. It ensures that only a handful of people will ever be able to trade, and that their activity fits inside the desired requisites. There is, of course, also the problem of limited space, and so the numbers are kept low. The market itself only often taking place once a week. It saddens my father, who explains that the whole country used to thrive with open markets, some of them weekly, but the majority all year round. These markets gave birth to the market towns, and far from small, squalid collections of stalls squashed into some car parks, these markets were enormous, giving rise to the wealth of many of the towns and cities of Britain. When people were provided with the freedom to trade openly, the wealth and well-being of those people was axiomatic, the natural shared result of their own commercial activities. That was the strength of Britain before industrialization, mass production, and the corporate takeover of all sectors of commercial activity. And now, sadly, my father has the job of keeping the last flames of that heritage alive. But as he admits, even that won't go on for much longer. Today, the only reason that any city or town council allows public markets at all is because it serves to attract people to the dying commercial areas, where the trading associations endlessly complain that the new shopping malls and supermarkets are putting them out of business. I think it's the least the city and town councils could do, since it was they who in the first place opened their arms with planning permissions, allowed the supermarkets and shopping malls in the first place. The heart of Britain's towns and cities are dying, if not already dead. There's no place for anyone who wants to trade in a direct environment. Most will either sign up for a job as a shelf stacker in Tesco's and Sainsbury's, or go to the end of the unemployment queue. Now let's look at another scenario, where the Muslim communities provide a new kind of open market, in fact a whole network of open markets. And like I said, we must remember the century we're living in. I'm not talking about a dusty village square with cloth tents and domestic animals hanging in cages. Today we have so much technology at our disposal. Any warehouse is a good start, protected from the elements to provide people with a clean, dry, but more importantly, free space to trade. There will be loading bays, storage facilities. We can basically provide the right environment for any kind of retail or wholesale trade. We can bring back life to the market, the very thing that's missing. And believe me, you'd be amazed at the quantity of people who would be there every day to buy and sell. We'd start to see new enterprises and services growing around the markets, activities, and we'll see trade movement between towns and cities strengthening. The possibilities and ramifications are enormous, But I don't want to get into detail at this stage at the actual physicality of the open market. What's more important here is to understand the concept. We would have created a space, an arena, in which the implementation of halal currency, disconnected from usury, would be free to circulate and grow, while at the same time opening our doors to those people of this country who are dissatisfied with the current state of affairs. The whole thing would run along these principles that the Muslims have come to inherit from that last community in Medina, and our social and commercial relationship would be one of justice, equity, and freedom of opportunity. Now imagine if our markets and our trading activities joined up with those of Muslim communities in other parts of Europe, communities who are transforming their way of interacting with the society and the communities in which they live. In Germany, we have a large Turkish population, who, like the Pakistani population in Britain, play a large part in Germany's economy. In France, we have the North African communities. In Spain, we have the hard-working and very united Senegalese. The more we look, the more we find that as Muslims, we have so much in common. There's so much